The world was connected by water long before global shipping, centuries before the modern era. Ancient canals were the first systems of global trade. By the end of this, you'll see the map differently. Not as solid land, but as a web, a living web of flowing ambition. Engineers without modern tools carved waterways across mountains. They did that, and forgotten cargo traveled on those silent currents. Ideas moved with the water. We'll look at the colossal arteries that moved empires and the hidden capillaries that fed the first cities. This is about how humanity tried to stitch continents together. Water was the thread, sheer will was the engine, and there's a cost to connecting the world, a real cost. The need was simple, it was urgent. In that land between the rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, the first farmers had learned to grow grain. But they faced a problem. The water that gave life wasn't reliable. A flood could destroy everything. A drought could kill the crops, so they started to dig. These first canals weren't for trade. They were for survival, just ditches, channels cut into the earth to guide water to a field or to drain a swamp. This was the beginning, the moment we stopped just living with the river and started talking to it. Historians like Turge Tvet see this as fundamental. It wasn't just moving water, it was moving possibility. Controlling water, even a little, created something new, a surplus, more barley than the village needed. More dates than could be eaten. That surplus changed everything. It meant not everyone had to farm. Someone could make pottery to store the grain. Another could weave or make tools. And with specialists you get trade. That irrigation ditch over time became a local highway. A farmer with extra grain could load a reed boat, pole it down the canal to a potter's village. Trade for jars he couldn't make. The canal, born from necessity, accidentally created a network. It connected field to workshop, village to village. That local solution laid the first stone. Or dug the first channel for a much larger idea. What if water could connect more than fields? What if it could connect entire worlds? That network of ditches could only reach so far. To shape a world, you need to think on the scale of a continent. You need an artery. And in history, no artery has ever been more deliberate, or more monumental, or more consequential than the one that began in ancient China. It didn't start as one grand project. It started as a series of solutions to a geographic problem. The fertile rice lands were in the warm, wet south. The political power, the capitals, the armies were in the drier north. Moving the harvests from the south overland to feed the north was a nightmare. Slow, vulnerable, the answer was to make the rivers do the work. Early engineers, beginning in the 5th century before the Common Era, started linking natural waterways. They carved channels through hills, built locks, created a patchwork of water roads, but it was under the Sui dynasty, around the 6th century of the Common Era, that these pieces were forged into one system. The Grand Canal, it became, as the historian Mark Elvin described it, a machine for empire building. Think of it not as a static ditch, but as a living conveyor belt of power. Every year, a fleet of thousands of government barges, the grain transport fleet, would make the journey north. These vessels weren't carrying luxury goods. They were carrying the substance of the state, the tax revenue of the entire southern region collected as rice. This river of grain flowing north fed the capital, Chang'an. A city of over 1 million people, it supplied the imperial armies on the frontiers. The canal was the central nervous system of the empire. That steady pulse of barges was its heartbeat. If the flow stopped, the empire could falter. The engineering behind it was staggering, especially considering the tools of the time. One of the most ingenious sections was the Lingqu Canal, built earlier but integrated into the system. Its builders faced a mountain ridge, a seemingly impossible barrier. Their solution was a summit-level canal. They didn't go around the mountain, they went over it. By carefully surveying the land, they found a gentle pass. They built a channel that used locks and weirs to lift boats up one side and lower them down the other. This showed a profound understanding of water balance, of hydraulics, principles still fundamental today. The human cost of that ambition was immense. Historical records note millions of conscripted laborers working under difficult conditions. The scale of the endeavor, the sheer volume of earth moved by hand, speaks to an unimaginable collective effort. That hardship underscores the canal's supreme importance to the rulers who built it. It was a priority that outweighed almost all others, but the Grand Canal's legacy is greater than moving rice. It moved history. It stitched together the cultures of northern and southern China, letting dialects, customs, ideas travel as easily as the barges. A poet from Hangzhou could take a boat to the capital. A northern culinary technique could float south. For over 1,000 years, it was the longest, oldest, most durable artificial waterway on the planet. A silent engine of cultural cohesion, it set a precedent, proving that humanity could, through will and ingenuity, re-engineer the face of a continent to serve its needs. This was no longer just about connecting fields. This was about connecting the fate of a civilization. The ambition to connect worlds wasn't just in the East. Out west, another civilization looked at its geography and saw a challenge. The Nile was Egypt's lifeblood, this north-flowing highway, and the Red Sea was a gateway to incense and spices to a place called Punt. Between them was the Sinai, a harsh desert strip. For centuries, traders had to unload ships on the Red Sea, haul cargo overland on donkeys and camels, then reload onto Nile barges. It was slow, it was expensive. The Pharaohs saw another way, a more elegant solution. Why not make the waters meet, link the Nile to the Red Sea, create a direct shortcut? That was the Canal of the Pharaohs, a project so grand it was tried not once but many times over centuries. Records point to a pharaoh, Senusret III, who may have ordered the first cuts. But centuries later, it was the Persian king Darius the Great who left a monument, boasting of its completion. The inscription says he ordered the canal dug so ships could sail from Egypt to Persia. This wasn't just local irrigation. This was a statement, a tool of empire. Controlling this shortcut meant controlling the flow of wealth from the Indian Ocean into the Mediterranean. Egyptian papyrus vessels, their sails catching the wind, gliding not just on the Nile but on a man-made river east. Phoenician merchant ships, the master traders, could bypass the Sinai entirely. Sail from the Levant to the riches of the south. The archaeological evidence is fragmentary. Its exact path, how often it was used, it's still studied. The canal likely faced a relentless enemy, silting up with desert sand. It needed constant maintenance, a burden too great sometimes, but its repeated revival by different rulers tells us everything. Its existence speaks to a persistent idea that the greatest power lies not in hoarding wealth but in directing its currents. By linking two great bodies of water, these leaders were trying to redraw the map of trade. A canal was more than a ditch, it was a lever to move the weight of empires, and that understanding would echo far beyond Egypt. The story of these great arteries, it starts with something smaller. More intimate. Before the grain fleets, before the imperial projects, there was a quieter network. In Mesopotamia, between the rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates weren't just geography. They were central veins, and from them, engineers grew a web of canals, a circulatory system. That was the true cradle, not just of cities but of the idea that you could direct water to build a world. The scale was different from the Grand Canal, but the principle was the same. Every city-state from Ur to Babylon was part of this lattice. Canals branched out like capillaries, reaching every barley field, every date palm grove. This wasn't haphazard. It was administered with a precision that feels modern. thousands of cuneiform tablets detail it. Their receipts, work orders, legal documents, they tell us about water inspectors, officials who measured and allocated the flow. A farmer upstream couldn't just dam a canal for his own field. He needed permission. The system was that organized because in that flat, sun-baked land, water wasn't just a resource, it was the currency of power. Of survival, this managed flow did two things. First, it created staggering agricultural surplus. The famous fertility of Mesopotamia, it wasn't just nature's gift. It was a manufactured miracle. Those carefully rationed waters turned the soil into a breadbasket, producing more barley and wool than any single city could consume. And surplus demands movement, which leads to the second thing. Those same canals that carried water to the fields became highways for goods. A laden barge, pulled by a merchant, could travel from carrying pottery, textiles, metal ingots. It would navigate the canals to another city, like Lhasa or Nippur, to trade for stone, timber, more grain. This was the birth of a complex regional economy, a web of interdependence woven by water, but the canals carried more than goods, they carried ideas. The barges that moved wool from also carried the cuneiform tablets that recorded the transaction. The system that required water inspectors also demanded legal codes to resolve disputes, so the Code of Hammurabi, one of our first written laws, it didn't emerge in a vacuum. It grew from the practical needs of managing a canal-based society. Rules about property, liability, fair trade. They were essential when your entire wealth floated on a network of ditches, writing law, commerce, urban life. These pillars of civilization, they didn't just appear side by side. They were fed by the same steady current. The Mesopotamian canal network was the original engine of urbanization. It proved a truth. By mastering the distribution of water, a society could concentrate people, specialize labor, generate wealth on a scale never seen before. It wove the first threads of a connected world, and it posed a question, one every later empire would have to answer. If you can build a network that sustains a city, what stops you from building one that sustains an empire? They had mountains and deserts in front of them, stone, wood, rope, that's what they had. And the real genius of these canals, it wasn't about a special tool. It was about understanding gravity, the most basic force. Water only flows downhill. So the whole challenge, building a canal for hundreds of miles, was to cut a channel with just the right grade. A slope so precise the water would move, not so fast it washes the banks away, not so slow it just sits and silts up. To find that line, that invisible path, they built the first precision instruments. The Roman groma, a wooden cross with plumb lines hanging from each arm. An engineer plants it in the ground, sights along the lines, a line one set with a marker in the distance, and you can trace a straight path. Across anything for leveling, they used the chorobates, a long wooden trough filled with water. Water finds its own level, so they could measure tiny height differences. Over miles, these weren't complicated machines. They were elegant, sight and water showing the way, but knowing the path, that was just the start. Then you had to move the earth. A mountain ridge in your way, no explosives, no machines, a bronze pickaxe, a wooden shovel, baskets. The labor force was enormous, conscripted from an empire or local communities. They worked in lines, cutting soil, filling baskets, passing them hand over hand up a slope. For hard rock, they used fire setting. Heat the stone with fire, then douse it with water. Makes it crack. This was a battle of persistence, measured in decades. The amount of earth they moved is hard to grasp. For the Grand Canal, the total excavation, they say it could form its own mountain range. One of the greatest physical endeavors in history, organized will on a staggering scale. Then, the water itself. How do you lift a boat over a hill? In China, they had an answer, the flash lock, a single wooden gate across the canal. A boat comes from the lower level, waits, they close the gate ahead of it. Let water pour in from upstream. The water level in that enclosed section rises fast until it matches the higher water ahead. Open the gate. The boat surges forward on that current. Simple, but it wasted water, huge amounts. The solution to that was the pound lock, the ancestor of every lock today, that uses 2 gates to make a sealed chamber. A boat enters, the downstream gate closes, then you let water in or drain it out through small channels, until the water level inside the chamber matches the upstream level. Open the upstream gate, the boat sails out, it climbed the hill, and you didn't lose a drop from the main canal. That's hydraulic engineering, born from watching and improving. In Egypt, the challenge was different, lifting water to feed the fields, to feed the builders. Their answer was the shaduf, a long pole balanced on a crossbeam. A bucket on one end, a counterweight on the other. A worker pulls the bucket down into the canal, fills it. The counterweight swings it up, pour it into an irrigation ditch. It looks simple, almost primitive, but you multiply that by thousands. All along a canal bank, it turns the desert margin into fertile land that creates the surplus. The agricultural surplus that makes the grand projects possible. These technologies, the surveying tool, the lock, the water lift, they weren't separate inventions. They were pieces of a language, a hydraulic language, a grammar for controlling water, and it was being written everywhere, all at once. Each culture, facing its own terrain, developed its own dialect. But the principles were the same. Water seeks its level, gravity is the engine, human ingenuity is the guide. They weren't just moving dirt and water. They were writing the first manual on how to reshape a continent, one carefully measured slope at a time. That hydraulic language, it wasn't just technical. It was sacred. For those engineers, water wasn't a resource to move. It was a divine force, something you negotiated with. Every canal they dug, every lock they built was a conversation with the gods. In Mesopotamia, the fresh water for their fields and canals it was believed to flow from the Abzu, a vast subterranean ocean of sweet water, the source of all life. Its master was the god Enki, lord of wisdom, of craft, and most importantly of those life-giving waters. The canals across the plain weren't just human constructions. They were extensions of Enki's power, his divine will made manifest. To maintain a canal was to honor him. To disrupt its flow was sacrilege. That mythology had a social purpose. It turned a massive public works project into a sacred duty. When a king ordered a new channel dug, he wasn't just a politician. He was Enki's earthly steward. The thousands of laborers weren't just conscripts. They were participants in a cosmic act, bringing order from chaos. That divine framing made the backbreaking work, the immense social cost, seem necessary. Inevitable, it was the will of the gods that the water flow, and therefore that the empire endure. You see the same pattern elsewhere. In China, the legendary founder of the Xia dynasty, he wasn't a conqueror with a sword. He was Yu the Great, a hydraulic engineer with a shovel. The myth says a great flood once covered the land. Yu's father tried to stop it by building dams. He failed. Yu succeeded by doing the opposite. He dredged channels. He cut canals. He guided the waters to the sea. For 13 years he worked without rest. His hands calloused, his body weathered. He was so dedicated he passed his own home 3 times and never went inside. That story is a masterpiece of cultural engineering. It blurs the line completely between mythic hero and civil servant. Yu isn't praised for strength in battle, but for perseverance in dredging. His victory isn't over a monster, but over chaos itself, the unruly floodwaters. By making their foundational hero a canal builder, Chinese tradition placed water management at the heart of legitimate kingship. A good ruler was one who controlled water. The Grand Canal, then, wasn't just infrastructure. It was the legacy of Yu the Great made stone and water. a continuous, flowing monument to the idea that civilization depends on the careful channeling of natural forces. These myths did more than justify construction. They shaped how people experienced these spaces. A major canal became a sacred corridor, a place where divine order intersected with daily life. The rhythmic work of the lock-keeper, the silent glide of a barge at dusk, the sound of the water, all of it could feel part of a larger, sanctioned harmony. The canal was a line drawn against entropy, proof that humanity, with divine favor, could impose a lasting system upon a capricious world. That spiritual layer gave these waterways a resilience beyond their physical banks. A canal could silt up, a dynasty could fall, but the story of you, the authority of Enki, those remained. They became a cultural blueprint, a ready-made justification for the next generation of rulers to pick up the shovel and start digging again. The mythology ensured that the ambition to connect, to control, to channel was never seen as mere ambition. It was destiny, and if the gods themselves commanded these waterways, what did that mean for the goods that traveled on them? What happened when these sacred networks of trade suddenly went silent? The real cargo on these waterways, it wasn't grain or tax shipments, it was the luxury goods. Things that had no practical purpose except to define a person, a court, to define a civilization. A single bolt of Chinese silk, lighter than a whisper, moving west on the Grand Canal. To a Roman senator, that wasn't just fabric, it was a shimmering symbol, a piece of a world impossibly far away. That silk paid for its journey with spices from India. Cardamom and pepper moving north on Indian rivers across the Persian Gulf, spices that changed food, that became so valuable they were counted like coins. Mediterranean glass moved east, brilliant and clear. A glass bowl from Alexandria arriving in China was a marvel, a technology that seemed like magic. And from the African interior, ivory and gold, flowing down the Nile toward the wider world, for crowns, for statues, for the seals of empires. These weren't just goods. They were condensed prestige, portable wealth. This was the reason kings dug canals, to control the flow of this tangible magic. But the barges carried a second cargo. An invisible one, more transformative than any spice. They carried passengers of the mind. A Buddhist monk traveling from India to China might book passage on a merchant ship along the coastal routes. In his possession, a sutra, a sacred text. That's how Buddhism floated into East Asia. Not with an army, with a trader's convoy. The same barge carrying Persian carpets, woven with intricate patterns, could carry the artistic idea behind those patterns. A design motif from Mesopotamia could turn up in a textile in the Indus Valley, then later inspire a fresco in Crete. Languages hitched rides, the word for sugar, for citrus, for cotton. These terms traveled with the products, seeping into new vocabularies. A technological idea, like a water-lifting device, could migrate from one river valley to another, improving harvests 1,000 miles from its origin. The canal was a university without walls, every merchant a potential teacher, every dock a marketplace for ideas. This constant, slow-motion exchange created something, long before the modern era, a kind of proto-globalization. Think about a wealthy citizen in Rome. At the empire's height, he reclines at a dinner party. He wears a silk robe from China. He eats from a silver plate mined in Spain, seasoned with pepper from India. The wine in his glass comes from Greece, but the glass itself might be from Egypt. His aesthetic world, his very sense of luxury, is an assemblage of the entire known world. His tastes are being shaped by goods and ideas that traveled on networks of water he will never see. This wasn't a connected world in the digital sense. It was connected in the material sense. Your daily life, if you were among the elite, was a testament to the reach of those silent, artificial rivers. The canal made the exotic routine. It made the distant intimate. It turned the map from a collection of separate places into a single, humming system. And in doing so, it performed the most vital function. It made the foreign familiar. It turned them into a source of us, the shared appreciation for a beautiful object. The shared use of a new technology, the slow blending of stories and beliefs. This was the true engineering marvel, not the cutting of the earth, but the softening of boundaries. The water didn't just carry goods, it carried the very ingredients of civilization, mixing them in a current that flowed for centuries. Those sacred channels needed a different kind of priest. A priest of logistics. For every mile of canal carrying silk, there was a mile of paperwork, a bureaucracy of ledgers and laws. The real power wasn't just moving the water. It was controlling who used it and what they paid. In Sumer, the scribes understood this first. They didn't use pickaxes, they used style, pressing wedge marks into damp clay. Their tablets recorded everything: how much water went to the barley fields of versus the date palms of Lhasa, which merchant owed a toll for a barge of copper. These weren't just lists, they were the legal system, the economic operating system for the whole civilization. A clogged canal was an emergency. A disputed water right could start a war between cities. The scribe with his tablet was the mediator. His records turned a chaotic river into a scheduled resource, accountable. This was administrative power. Power from coordination, not conquest. Centuries later, a continent away, this idea reached its peak. In Tang Dynasty China, the Grand Canal was so vital, so complex, it created its own governing body. The Canal Commission, the world's first dedicated ministry of transport, a sprawling bureaucracy with immense authority. Its officials managed a dizzying list of tasks. They scheduled thousands of government grain barges to feed the capital. They operated the locks and weirs, a ballet of timed water releases. They collected tolls from private merchants, a huge source of imperial revenue. They organized the armies of laborers for dredging, fighting the endless battle against silt. This created a new class of power, the canal official. His authority didn't come from noble birth or military rank. It came from his mastery of the schedule, the ledger, the regulation. He decided which barge went first through a crowded lock. He certified a cargo's weight for tax. He could delay a shipment of silk with one stroke of his brush. This was soft power with hard consequences. A corrupt official could strangle the economic lifeline of the empire. So the state took this role seriously. Examinations, audits, reports sent straight to the capital. The efficiency of the canal was a report card on the emperor himself. This system was the ancient world's internet protocol, a set of rules letting different nodes interact, different cities, different producers on a shared network. The regulations prevented blockages, both physical and bureaucratic. A standard system of measurements meant a merchant from Hangzhou knew the toll in Luoyang. Clear rules for right-of-way prevented traffic jams that could last days. The Canal Commission didn't just move boats, it moved information. It created predictability in a vast, uncertain enterprise. When a merchant invested in porcelain, he wasn't just betting on the market, he was betting on the system that promised his goods would move on time. Be taxed fairly, arrive intact. That trust was the invisible cargo, the cargo that made all the other cargo valuable. So the canal became more than engineering. It became a mirror of governance. The logistical skill to keep it flowing was political control. A well-managed canal meant full granaries, paid soldiers. Happy merchants, it meant stability. A neglected canal meant scarcity, unrest, a loss of imperial legitimacy. The health of the waterway was the health of the state. This administrative backbone, from the Sumerian scribe to the Tang bureaucrat, shows something. The greatest networks aren't built of stone and water alone. They are built of rules and trust, and the meticulous, invisible work of keeping the current moving. And what happens when that current, managed so carefully for centuries, is finally cut? When the last barge passes and the water grows still, that administrative trust came with a real, tangible reward. The economic power of these waterways was immense. Before a canal, moving a ton of grain 100 miles overland was a huge undertaking. You needed dozens of animals, feed for them, guards for protection. The cost could double the value of the cargo or triple it, but put that ton on a barge. A single team could tow it on calm water. The cost just fell. That simple shift in physics, sliding instead of carrying, changed everything about commerce. Luxuries became common goods. A farmer inland could get salt from the coast. Someone in a city could buy fruit from a far-off valley. The canal was a leveling force. It lowered prices and expanded what people could own. This cheap transport changed production itself. A region with good clay didn't just make pots for its own village. It could become a center for pottery, because it knew the canal could ship those fragile wares cheaply and safely to many markets. And in return, that same canal would bring in wheat its own fields didn't produce. That's market specialization. It's the base of a complex economy. Towns started to be known not for what they needed, but for what they made best. One town made iron tools, another wove linen, another smoked fish. The canal network turned separate, self-sufficient villages into one connected economic body, each part feeding the others, and the points where these flows met, the canal junctions, they burst into life. These were the first market towns, places like Yongzhou on the Grand Canal, or the wharf towns in Mesopotamia. Goods from many regions came together there. Warehouses lined the banks, taverns and hostels appeared for the bargemen. Scribes set up to record deals. A permanent marketplace grew from a temporary stop. These towns were the engines, their rhythm set by arriving and departing barges. All this movement needed a new way to pay. Barter works for a direct trade, a pot for a chicken. But how do you pay a toll keeper or a barge captain's wage? Or buy goods from several merchants? The answer was standardized money. The need to make canal trade work pushed hard for coinage and credit. Tolls had to be paid in a recognized currency. Wages were settled in coin. Merchants started using letters of credit, a promise to pay at the next port, so they didn't have to carry heavy chests of metal. The canal, in effect, monetized the economy. It forced financial tools to develop to keep up with the movement of goods. Wealth stopped being just sacks of grain or piles of pottery. It became a number in a ledger, a promise on paper, a flow of silver coins moving with the spices. This created a new kind of person, not a noble who owned land or a priest who held tradition, but a commercial class whose wealth was liquid, tied completely to the uninterrupted flow of the waterways. A merchant's entire fortune could be afloat, invested in a cargo of silk, halfway to its destination. His success depended on the Canal Commission's efficiency, the stability of the currency, the safety of the routes. This gave merchants a powerful stake in political order. They became advocates for maintenance, for clear laws, for peace. Their influence grew with every barge that sailed, and from their profits the state took its share. Canal tolls became a massive, reliable source of tax revenue. It funded armies and palaces. The waterway was a wealth pump, circulating goods and siphoning off a portion for the state in a steady stream. So the canal wasn't just moving things, it was generating the idea of a cash economy. It was fostering a middle class and funding empires. It turned geography into capital. But this vibrant, flowing world of commerce sat on a fragile base. What happened when the water stopped? That steady flow of wealth was a vulnerability. The same water that carried silk could carry an army. The canal had this dual nature, a current of commerce and a current of power. It was a military supply line disguised as a trade route. The strategic value was immense. For Rome, expanding across Europe, rivers were natural highways, but rivers don't always go where you need an army to go. So Roman engineers built the Fossi. These weren't grand commercial canals, they were military channels cut straight and fast to move legions through marshland. To resupply a distant fort or to act as a defensive moat, the fosse was a tool of conquest. It turned the landscape into an ally. In China, the calculation was even clearer. The Grand Canal's northward pulse of grain wasn't just for feeding the capital, it was for feeding the Great Wall. The northern frontier armies were massive. Stationing them was one thing, supplying them was the real challenge. An army marches on its stomach. Moving enough food overland for hundreds of thousands of men was a nightmare. The Grand Canal solved it. It became a conveyor belt for military logistics. Government barges, protected by soldiers, would move tax grain from the south directly to granaries near the frontier. A commander could plan a campaign knowing his supplies were a predictable water journey away, not a risky trek over mountains. The canal didn't just transport food. It transported stability. It let the empire project power over astonishing distances, tying the agricultural heartland directly to the military fist. This made the canals themselves targets. In warfare, a canal wasn't neutral ground. A besieging army wouldn't just surround a city, it would first try to control the water. The most direct attack was diversion. Dam or reroute the main canal upstream, starve the city of drinking water and economic life. A clever defender might use the canal as a weapon. Open sluice gates to flood the approaches, bog down the attack. The control of a single junction where two major canals met could decide a region's fate. Whoever held that crossroads held the key to moving anything: food, reinforcements, information. Losing it meant your army was cut off, your cities began to starve. Your rule unraveled from within. This intertwining of economy and defense made canal policy a matter of national security. A ruler's decision to expand a waterway wasn't just an economic calculation. It was a geopolitical one. Building the Grand Canal was an act of military consolidation. Maintaining the Mesopotamian networks meant ensuring no rival could strangle your supply lines. The budget for dredging, for lock maintenance, for garrisoning key points, that was defense spending. The official who managed canal traffic was, in effect, a quartermaster general for the entire state. So the peaceful merchant and the soldier shared the same water. The barge with pottery and the barge with spears followed the same current. This duality meant the health of the canal was the health of the state. Its silting up wasn't just an economic nuisance, it was a strategic decay, a weakening of the empire's ability to feed its people and defend its borders at the same time. The canal was the thread that stitched together the two most vital organs, the stomach and the sword. And when that thread finally frayed, the entire fabric of power began to unravel. You have to wonder what it looks like when a system that fundamental finally falls silent. The silence of a silted canal meant more than trade ending. It was the end of a conversation. Those waterways were linear forums for centuries, the most vital social network of the ancient world. Where barges waited for a lock to open or for cargo to be inspected, people talked. They exchanged words, not just goods. A Zoroastrian fire priest from Persia, traveling with carpets, might share a meal at a canal-side inn with a Hindu merchant from the Indus Valley. Their discussion wasn't about profit margins, it was about the nature of the soul, the struggle between light and darkness. They'd find surprising parallels in their stories. The Hindu concept of Dharma and the Zoroastrian idea of a Shah, both speaking to a cosmic order. These weren't formal debates, they were organic human interactions. What happens when people from different worlds are forced to wait together? The canal created that space. The exchange was visual, too. An artisan along the Grand Canal would unpack a crate from a barge. Inside, among the bolts of cloth, he'd find a piece of pottery from Mesopotamia, decorated with a repeating geometric pattern, a border of interlocking lotus flowers. He'd never seen that design before, but he liked it. So when he crafted a piece of lacquerware for a local official, he borrowed that motif, he adapted it. made it his own. That pattern, born on the banks of the Tigris, now adorned a box in China. It lost its original meaning but gained a new life. Artistic ideas traveled as stowaways. They jumped from medium to medium. A textile pattern became a mural. A metalworking technique for a dagger hilt was applied to a ceremonial wine vessel. The canal was a gallery in motion, a floating museum that inspired innovation everywhere it stopped. Then there were the texts. Before printing, knowledge was fragile. It lived on scrolls and codices copied by hand. A merchant with an eye for a niche market might commission copies of a popular philosophical text from Alexandria. He'd pack them in wax-sealed tubes for the journey. That barge would travel the Nile, transfer to an overland caravan, then onto a Mesopotamian canal boat. Eventually, those scrolls would be unloaded in a city like Palmyra, a hub of east-west trade. There, a scholar with means could buy one. He'd read the thoughts of a Greek Stoic philosopher translated into Aramaic. Ideas about inner peace and accepting fate. Those ideas might resonate with his own local traditions. He might write a commentary blending the concepts. A new hybrid school of thought could be born from that single, risky commercial transaction. The canal made the traffic in ideas not just possible but profitable. This constant, slow-motion interaction along set routes led to something, syncretism, the blending of beliefs and practices until they became something new. You see it in the statues from Gandhara along the Silk Road. They depict the Buddha, but the artistic style is purely classical Greek. The robes drape like a Roman toga. The face has the serene, idealized features of an Apollo. This is the visual record of a conversation that happened over generations. That moved at the speed of a laden barge. It created a cosmopolitan outlook in the great canal cities, in places like Babylon or Chang'an or later Baghdad. Diversity wasn't an abstract concept. It was the smell of different cuisines in the market, the sound of a dozen languages on the docks, the sight of a dozen different styles of dress on the same street. People learned to navigate difference because their economic survival depended on it. Tolerance was a practical necessity, so the canal network did more than transport spices and silk. It transported the very ingredients of culture. It took isolated pools of tradition and connected them, allowing them to mix into rich hybrid tapestries. The world we inherited wasn't built by civilizations developing in isolation. It was built in the bustling, noisy, waiting areas along those ancient waterways. In the space between one barge's departure and another's arrival, that's where our shared ideas were born. The canals reshaped the earth. It was a massive intervention. They brought life to barren places. In Mesopotamia, engineers drained the marshes. They turned wetlands into farmland. The canal banks became new ecosystems. A strip of green through the desert, trees grew for shade and timber. Birds and wildlife came to these artificial rivers. For communities, this was a victory. They had built a garden, but the environment answers back. In that same region, a problem was brewing. The irrigation water carried dissolved salts. The water would evaporate under the sun, leaving the salts in the soil. With drainage, the salts could be flushed away, but many early canals weren't designed for this. Over centuries, the salt built up. It poisoned the earth. Lush grainland began to yield only weeds. Records show declining harvests. Fields became tired and white-crusted. This salinization wasn't a sudden disaster. It was a slow fade, a diminishing return. It may have quietly eroded the foundation of those city-states. As the land's bounty ebbed, the canals rewrote local water stories. Diverting a river into new channels meant taking water from somewhere else. Downstream communities or natural wetlands could find their lifeline cut. An ecosystem might wither because the water now flowed on a human-made schedule. Some projects may have turned areas drier. They altered groundwater patterns in ways the engineers never foresaw. They were mastering water in one place but couldn't see the full picture. This points to the core vulnerability. These societies didn't just build near a river. They built inside a machine of their own making. Their survival depended on constant maintenance. The battle against silt was never ending. Every flood season deposited sediment. If a dynasty grew weak or a war came, the dredging crews would stop. The canals would shallow, then choke. A vital link would fail. The flow of goods and food would slow to a trickle. A prolonged drought could drop water levels below the intakes. The entire system would become useless. The concentration of population that the canal enabled made the civilization sensitive to its breakdown. An administrative collapse could be as devastating as an invasion. So these were early lessons in ecological cost. Harnessing nature for progress requires paying a kind of rent. A tax of perpetual vigilance. The ancients learned you could not command the water without accepting responsibility for all the changes. Their legacy isn't just one of mastery, but of a delicate balance between creating plenty and risking the very foundation. This inherent fragility makes the final fate of these networks poignant. Even the greatest of them did not flow forever. That immense labor of reshaping the earth, it didn't just fade into the dirt, it echoed. It echoed in the stories people told, stories about where they came from, about what power really was. When a society does something that vast, something past ordinary understanding, it needs a story, an explanation, not just engineering. Destiny, so the physical canals fed back into myth. They became monuments in epic tales. Take the oldest written story we have, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is king of Uruk, a city built by canals. In his quest for fame, for immortality, one of his great deeds is he digs wells. He cuts through stone to bring water. It's not a grand canal explicitly, but it's the mythic echo, the foundational Mesopotamian act, the king as a digger of channels, a bringer of life-giving water. And this wasn't a chore, it was a kingly virtue, a heroic feat. It put the most vital communal work right at the heart of the hero's journey. The story says that to build a civilization is itself an epic struggle. But in a different culture, that same immense labor could be framed differently, not as heroism, as a curse. Greek mythology, the story of the Danaides. 50 daughters of Danaus punished for a crime. Their eternal task is to carry water in jars with holes, trying to fill a bottomless vessel. It's a haunting image. Futile, endless labor. It's not about a canal, but the myth captures the human experience of that work. The back-breaking, repetitive, seemingly endless task of moving water. It transforms the hardship of the conscripted laborer into a symbol, a divine punishment. The myth gives a name, a shape, to the exhaustion felt by thousands moving earth under the sun. It acknowledges the cost. These stories had a purpose. They domesticated the unimaginable. How do you explain a waterway that cuts across a mountain to a child? You tell a story, a hero with divine strength, a clever giant. How do you justify generations of toil to maintain it? You weave it into your cultural identity. A trial your ancestors endured to secure your prosperity. The canal stopped being just a ditch. It became a character in the national saga, a symbol of collective will so powerful it blurred the line between human endeavor and the work of gods. This narrative layer granted the canals a kind of immortality. A physical canal can silt up, its stones can be carted away. Its path can be forgotten, plowed over. But a story, once embedded in the culture, is far more durable. Long after the last barge passed through a forgotten Chinese lock, the legend of Yu the Great, the tamer of floods, kept teaching each new generation about the virtue of water management. Long after Babylonian canals were buried under desert sand, the tale of Gilgamesh digging wells survived on clay tablets, preserving the memory that controlling water was the very essence of building civilization. So these waterways had a double existence. They flowed with real water, carrying real ships, and they flowed through the collective imagination, carrying meaning. They became more than infrastructure. They became foundational myths, proof that people had once bent the world to their will. And in the telling, they made sure the awe of that achievement would outlast the stones. Outlast the sluice gates. The story became the true monument, and if the story of their building was epic, then the story of their end would be a different kind of tale. A whisper of something lost. That whisper of loss, it isn't the whole story. The great arteries of China and Egypt, they capture the imagination. But that same impulse to engineer water, it thrived far from those famous centers. In other places, just as challenging, other cultures were writing their own hydraulic language. In the dry deserts of what's now Arizona, the Hohokam people built something. Between about 300 and 1400 years ago, they carved over 500 miles of irrigation canals into the earth. This wasn't a small network. It was a vast, coordinated system. It turned the Salt River Valley into a green oasis. They used simple tools, stone and wood, to dig these channels. Precise in their gradient, some so wide you could float a small canoe. These canals fed fields, maize, beans, cotton. They supported large, permanent villages. A complex society. Then, for reasons scholars still look into, the Hohokam faded from the region. Their magnificent canals slowly filled with sand, waiting to be rediscovered centuries later. Their story is a reminder. The drive to harness water for survival, it wasn't confined to the so-called cradles. It was a human response, emerging independently wherever people faced the harsh arithmetic of drought. On the other side of the world, in the lush river deltas of southern India, another water culture reached a peak. Here, the Chola dynasty, around the 11th century, built the Grand Anicut. This wasn't just a dam, it was a hydrological computer made of stone, built across the Kaveri River. Its genius was in its simplicity, its durability. The structure was designed to split the river's flow. Part of the water continued down the natural channel. A significant portion was diverted into a massive, man-made canal that ran for miles, parallel to the river. This created a twin artery, one for nature's course, one for human need. The canal fed an entire lattice of smaller channels, irrigating countless rice paddies, creating predictable abundance in a land of seasonal rains. But it also served as a navigable waterway. Boats could transport the harvest. The Grand Anicut is so well engineered that its core structure is still in use today. Nearly 1,000 years later, a silent testament to Chola foresight, perhaps the most poetic example comes from Sri Lanka. The ancient Sinhalese kingdoms faced a paradox. Their island got abundant monsoon rain, but it fell in seasonal deluges. The challenge wasn't finding water, it was storing it, distributing it across the dry season. Their solution was a landscape-scale work. They built not just canals but vast, shallow reservoirs. They called them tanks. These weren't mere ponds. They were immense, artificial lakes, carefully sited, interconnected by a web of canals. The system worked like a living organism. Canals would capture monsoon overflow from rivers, channel it into a major tank. That tank would then release water through more canals to feed smaller downstream tanks and fields in a carefully timed sequence. This cascade of reservoirs created a resilient water supply, something that could withstand variable rainfall. The social organization required to build and maintain this, it was immense. It shaped the very structure of Sinhalese kingship and community. The most remarkable part, sections of this ancient network, meticulously maintained, passed down through generations, are still functioning today. Farmers still plant their rice using water released from tanks built over 1,500 years ago. These stories, from the Arizona deserts to the Indian deltas to the Sri Lankan reservoirs, they tell us something. The canal, the dam, the reservoir, These weren't inventions that spread from a single source. They were discoveries, made again and again by human societies confronting the essential problem of water. They represent a universal chapter where geography presents a puzzle, and human ingenuity against the odds finds a way to speak to the rivers, to ask the rain to stay. To weave the lifelines of a civilization, this was a global conversation with water, conducted in 1,000 different dialects, and the echoes of that conversation would eventually draw these separate worlds closer, setting the stage for a connection no single canal could ever achieve. There's ingenuity and connection, but there's a shadow to it. The foundation isn't just earth and water. It's human effort on a scale that's hard to picture. To move that much soil, to dig those canals, ancient societies used the resource they had the most of. People. The labor force was colossal, usually drawn from the lowest ranks, peasants, conscripted, a mandatory service to the state, prisoners of war. Put to work on these monumental projects, and in many places enslaved people, their lives and liberty directed by others. The record for the Grand Canal under the Sui dynasty notes a staggering toll. Accounts suggest millions of conscripted workers. Conditions were extremely difficult. The scale meant the work was relentless. The environment was harsh. For the individual, it was profound hardship, and that presents a paradox. These waterways are celebrated, engines of cultural exchange, economic growth. But they were also monuments to a different kind of power, the absolute power of a ruler, to command the time, the strength, the very lives of thousands. The social organization needed to coordinate this, to house, feed, manage these vast workforces. That itself was a terrifying feat of administration. It reflected a worldview where the ambition of the state outweighed the welfare of the individual. To acknowledge that isn't to diminish the engineering, it's to see it in full. It adds a sobering layer, the connectivity that let silk reach Rome, spices flavor distant meals, the economic growth that built great cities. It came at a profound price. A price paid not from treasuries but in the quiet struggles of nameless multitudes. Their silent labor is the unspoken current beneath every story of ancient trade. And it leads to a question about legacy. What do we do with a wonder that's also a testament to such human cost? How does that knowledge change the way we see the banks? The quiet, grass-covered banks of a long, silent canal. The stage was built by that immense human effort, but the play needed its own characters, the vessels. A canal boat was a specific tool, shaped by the waterways rules. The constraints were clear, shallow, narrow, confined. The answer was a specific form. The barge, its hull was flat, not curved, so it could glide over mud and gravel, needing just a few feet of water to carry a heavy load. Its shape was long and slender, like a floating needle, to slip through the man-made channels without scraping the banks. This design traded the sea's waves for the canal's calm, a vehicle of pure efficiency. Built to carry maximum weight with minimum draft, but without wind in a narrow cut or with a current going the wrong way, these boats needed another engine. That engine walked on land. For thousands of years, the defining sight was the towpath, a worn track beside the water, and on it a team, sometimes men, bent against ropes. More often animals, oxen, donkeys, later mules. Their steady, plodding pace set the rhythm. A bargeman didn't steer with a tiller alone. He guided the bow while his wife or child, walking with the animal, kept the towline from tangling in the trees. The boat became an extension of the land, a slow partnership between beast and current. The sound was harness creak, the plod of hooves, water against a flat hull. This was the pace of the ancient supply chain, measured in footsteps, but where the canals opened up, where wind could catch, another technology took over. In China, they built sailing barges, not the deep-keeled ships of the Mediterranean. These were adaptations, with retractable rudders and centerboards for shallow sections. Their sails, often bamboo matting, could catch the slightest breeze. A captain became a master of two worlds, using wind where he could, resorting to the towpath when the walls closed in. That flexibility maximized speed, minimized the grueling labor. This relationship between the ditch and the boat is a quiet marvel. They designed the vehicle and the road as one system. The lock's width determined the barge's beam. The canal's depth dictated the flat bottom. The need for stability under heavy loads led to clever internal structure. Everything was optimized. That holistic thinking shows a sophisticated understanding of networks. They weren't just building a water road, they were building an entire ecosystem of movement. Each barge, crawling on its towpath or ghosting under sail, was a single cell in a vast, circulating body. The health of that body depended on every part working in unison. From the dredger's shovel to the mule driver's call, it makes you wonder about the people who lived in that rhythm, what they saw from that floating point. That rhythm could go on for centuries, but it wasn't eternal. The great networks didn't vanish overnight. Their fading was a slow unwinding, a conversation with the water that finally fell silent. And the most relentless enemy was the very earth they moved, silt. Every rainstorm, every flood upstream carried these fine particles of soil. They'd settle in the still waters of the canal bed. A gradual, inevitable filling, and that demanded a perpetual response. Armies of dredgers, year after year, scooping out the mud to keep the channel clear. Their work was the hidden tax on the whole system's existence. So when a dynasty grew weak, or when wars drained the treasury, or a famine scattered the labor force, that maintenance would falter. The dredging stopped and the silt began to win. A canal would grow shallow, then impassable. A vital link in the chain would dissolve back into farmland. The political will to organize that endless labor was as vital as the water itself. But beyond the slow choke of silt, the world outside the canals was changing. On the open seas, shipbuilders and navigators were making leaps. The sternpost rudder, better sail designs, improved charts. It meant deep water vessels could undertake longer, more reliable ocean voyages. Why ship goods on a 1,000-mile canal network with all its tolls and transfers when a sturdy caravel could carry them directly from Canton to the Persian Gulf? The rise of these maritime highways, especially from the 15th century onward, rerouted the global currents of commerce. Some canals, the ones designed as shortcuts between seas, became expensive relics. The economic logic that built them was quietly overturned by the wind, and the environment itself could shift the balance. Long-term climate patterns aren't static. Researchers looking at sediment cores and tree rings see evidence of prolonged droughts in various regions across history. A canal network is a machine built for a specific range of river flows. A multi-decade shift to a drier climate could lower the water in the source rivers below the canal intakes. The magnificent system would simply have nothing to carry. Or conversely, a period of intense flooding could breach banks and wash away infrastructure faster than it could be repaired. The water they sought to command could, in the end, refuse their schedule. Often, the fate of the canal was tied directly to the fate of the state that built it. The Roman military foci across Europe are a perfect example. They were tools of an active, expanding empire. When that empire contracted, when the legions withdrew, there was no one left to maintain these channels. They weren't woven into local economies. They served a single, departing master. Without that central authority and its military purpose, they were quickly abandoned. Filled in or forgotten, their decay was a symptom of a larger political collapse, and in times of war, the canal could be a weapon turned against itself. An invading army seeking to cripple a region wouldn't just attack its cities, it would target its lifelines. Deliberately breaching a major canal upstream could flood enemy lands, destroy crops, cut supply routes. It was a strategy of scorched earth, but with water. The damage from such an act could be so extensive that even after the conflict ended, the resources or the knowledge to repair it were gone. The canal would remain a broken scar on the landscape, so the end of these eras was rarely a dramatic explosion. It was a slow dimming, a lock gate that wasn't repaired. A dredging crew that was never called back, a merchant who chose a faster ocean route. It was the accumulation of 1,000 small neglects. The technology that had defined an age, that had seemed the pinnacle of human control, was gradually turned away from. The water, patient and persistent, finally reclaimed its own paths. The towpaths grew over with grass. The stone of the locks was taken for other buildings. The grand design faded back into the land, leaving behind only stories and a question. What remains when the water is gone? The earth remembers things history has forgotten. Under our modern fields, under quiet deserts, there are these old blueprints for waterways. They're just waiting, and today we don't have to rely on old texts or legends. Archaeology has new eyes. The most powerful tool isn't a shovel. It's a view from space, satellite imagery, and a technology called LIDAR. It uses laser pulses to map the ground. It can see through soil and vegetation. It shows these faint geometric scars. From high above, the land tells a different story. You see straight lines cutting across river bends. Perfect rectangles where canals made harbors. They're like phantom limbs, a landscape that was once alive with water. It's like finding the skeleton of a huge, forgotten creature. Its bones are made of earth and intention. In southern Iraq, this is rewriting early civilization. Archaeologists flew LIDAR over what was Sumer. They mapped a stunning web of ancient watercourses. They can see how canals connected cities, and Uruk, not as isolated dots on a map, but as nodes in a living water network that realigns everything. It shows the city-states were bound together by shared water management. Long before conquest or formal alliance, the geography of power was drawn in water. Further east, in Central Asia's deserts, a similar thing happened. The discovery of the Darial Canal system, a massive network built by the Khwarezmian civilization. It was an oasis engine. It turned a barren region into fertile land. It supported cities and trade for centuries. Its scale, revealed by aerial surveys and excavation, spoke of a society that mastered its environment. Then its achievements were buried by time and shifting sand. These discoveries do more than add a line to a history book. They restore a lost piece of a civilization's logic. They show how they solved the puzzle of survival. But the real magic is when the trowel hits something more personal than a canal bank. They uncover the moments. A perfectly preserved wooden lock gate. Its timbers still show the axe marks of the builder, the reinforced edges of a key designed for the constant bump of barges. And then the small treasures lost in the mud, a copper coin slipped from a merchant's purse, a stone tool dropped by a laborer, a cooking pot maybe lost overboard. These artifacts are intimate. Their noise in the silence. That coin had a value, a day's wage. That pot held a family's meal. They turned the canal from an engineering diagram into a lived experience. They're the physical evidence of the daily rhythm, the shout of the lock keeper, the groan of a tow rope, merchants haggling on a crowded wharf. Every broken piece of pottery, every worn tool, is a message from the people who made the system pulse. They waited as silent witnesses for centuries beneath the soil. Now they tell their stories, not of kings and empires, but of journeys taken, meals shared. A life conducted in constant, gentle motion along these liquid roads. They remind you the grandest networks were made of countless small, human moments. And if the remnants of these systems can be found, what about the knowledge that built them? Did that vanish into the silt, or did it find another way to flow forward? The difference in how you build a network, it's right there in the land. You look at China, the Grand Canal is this one massive spine, 1,000 miles north to south. It was a project from the top. Emperors conceived it, the imperial treasury paid for it, millions of conscripted laborers built it. Its purpose was clear. It was an instrument of state power, to unify the realm, to feed the capital, to supply the frontier armies, to move all the tax grain from the south. The canal was a physical form of a centralized idea, the state as the ultimate architect, the individual just a part in a vast national machine. Success was measured in stability. Was the capital fed? Were the troops supplied? Was the realm secure? This was infrastructure as a tool for political cohesion, a deliberate act of engineering a single identity from many different regions. Then you look at the land between the Tigris and Euphrates. That network looks entirely different. It wasn't one central line, it was a sprawling, decentralized web. A capillary system of thousands of smaller canals. Each major city-state Uruk, Babylon was its own hub. It managed water for its own immediate hinterland. These systems were built and maintained locally, often by the city's own temple authorities or by regional governors. The need was immediate and practical. Irrigate these fields, feed this city, facilitate trade with our neighbors. The philosophy came from the bottom up. It emerged from the daily necessities of survival, of commerce. Control was fragmented. A king in Babylon might claim supremacy, but the actual management of a canal 10 miles from was in local hands. This reflected a model built around powerful, semi-independent city-states. Their cooperation and their conflict was managed through a shared need for the water network. It was a system of negotiated order, not imperial decree. That contrast extends to later examples in Europe. The Dutch polder systems, the canal networks of medieval Italian city-states like Venice. They continued this localized tradition. Built by communities for communities, to drain a swamp for farmland, to defend a city with a watery moat, to create a marketplace. The scale was human, the governance often communal. The goal wasn't to bind an empire together, but to solve a specific, pressing problem for a town or a region. So the canal was a blank slate, a powerful technology that different societies inscribed with their own values. The Chinese model shows a civilization that saw order as something to be imposed from the center, for the greater, long-term good of the whole. The Mesopotamian model, the later European models, show societies where order emerged from local initiative, tailored to immediate, tangible needs. Both approaches worked. The Grand Canal's centralized might gave China a durable logistical advantage for over 1,000 years. Mesopotamia's decentralized web fostered incredible urban innovation, economic complexity among its rival cities. There was no single ancient blueprint. The water didn't care about philosophy. It just flowed where it was directed, but the hand that directed it and the mind behind that hand revealed everything about how that society saw itself. Was it a single body with one head or a league of independent minds? The answer is still visible, not in the water but in the shape the water was told to take. And if the shape of the network reflected the mind of the builder, then the ultimate fate of these systems might hold a final lesson about the limits of any design. The idea of isolated civilizations is a myth. It's a comforting one. It makes history neat, but the canals wash that away. They weren't local, they were connectors. They were designed to link, to create a chain. Take Mesopotamia, its canal web. The Tigris and Euphrates flowed south into the Persian Gulf, and that gulf was a highway to the Indus Valley. A merchant in could load a barge, wool and grain. That barge would travel the canals to a river port, the cargo transferred to a seafaring vessel. A ship built of reeds and bitumen, it would sail down the Gulf, maybe to the mouth of the Indus, and then the process reversed. Goods from the Indian subcontinent came back. Colorful cotton, carved ivory, precious stones, they'd travel north, up the rivers, into the canal networks, toward the heart of Mesopotamia. This wasn't a single trade route. Not like the Silk Road, it was slower, more organic, a handoff from one river system to a canal, to a sea, to another river, a chain where no single link spanned the whole distance. The canal was the crucial inland link. It brought the wealth of the hinterlands to the sea, and it distributed the wonders of the distant world deep into the interior. We see this pattern. In Egypt, the Pharaohs' canal aimed for the Red Sea. Why? To create a shortcut to the incense lands of Punt, to connect the Nile's network to the Indian Ocean's trade winds. In China, the Grand Canal's southern terminus was Hangzhou, a major port. From there, Chinese goods transferred to ocean-going junks, bound for Southeast Asia. And eventually, through other hands, to the wider world. The canal was never the end. It was the feeder line, the distributor. It gathered local surplus and funneled it toward the maritime highways. And in return, it siphoned foreign luxuries and ideas from those ports, spread them inland. This challenges a modern idea that globalization began with steamships, with telegraph cables, that before the 19th century the world was separate, unaware. The canals tell a different story. They show a proto-globalization. A globalization that moved at the speed of a laden barge, a seasonal monsoon. It was slower, more fragile, but it was real. A Roman glass bowl in a Chinese tomb isn't an accident. It's an endpoint, a journey that likely involved a Mediterranean ship, an overland caravan through Persia, a river boat on the Tigris, and finally, a canal barge on the Grand Canal. Each leg made possible by these engineered links. The ancient engineer digging a summit canal in China wasn't just solving a local food problem. He was unintentionally adding a new lane to a highway that stretched halfway across the known world. His work made it slightly easier for a Roman idea to reach a Korean scholar, for a Persian motif to inspire a Japanese painter. This interconnectedness means civilizations weren't speaking into a void. They were in a slow conversation, centuries long. A drought in Mesopotamia might affect the supply of tin from Anatolia. That could shift metalworking practices in the Indus Valley. A new lock design in China, improving canal efficiency, could indirectly increase the flow of spices toward Europe. By making the collection from southern ports more reliable, the system had a faint global pulse. The canals were the capillaries that carried that pulse inland. So next time you look at a map of the ancient world, don't see empty spaces between empires. See the potential lines, the river courses, the portages, the man-made channels that turned separate basins into a single, whispering network. Our ancestors were connected long before we called it a network. They felt the tug of distant markets, the allure of foreign wonders, and they used water, the oldest road, to reach for them. The lock gates in ancient China that lifted boats, the aqueducts that carried Roman water, the sight lines of Mesopotamian surveyors. These weren't dead ends, they were seeds, the knowledge of how to speak to water, how to guide its power. That was an inheritance. It passed from one generation of builders to the next, across centuries of silence. When Renaissance scholars in Italy read those rediscovered Roman texts, they weren't just reading history. They were studying a manual, the accounts of aqueduct construction, of harbor engineering. They became blueprints. Leonardo da Vinci filled notebooks with designs for canal locks, dredging machines. His genius was engaging with that ancient conversation. He stood on the banks of those old waterways, learning their grammar, and that lineage leads in a straight line, a long line, to the two most audacious canal projects of the modern age. The Suez Canal opened in 1869, and the Panama Canal completed in 1914. Their scale is unimaginably greater, forged with steam shovels and dynamite. But the core idea was ancient: to create a shortcut, to erase a geographic barrier and rewrite the map of global trade. The French engineers and later the American engineers who tackled these projects, they faced the same fundamental puzzles as the ancient builders. How do you maintain a precise water level across a vast, uneven landscape? How do you lift massive ships over a continental divide? The answer, in Panama, was a system of monumental locks. A direct, scaled-up evolution of the simple pound lock. It was the same principle: a sealed chamber, water raised or lowered, a vessel lifted. The tools were steel and concrete instead of wood and earth, but the conversation with gravity was identical. And the challenge of moving the workforce, the staggering logistics, the human cost of such projects that echoed the ancient world, the mobilization of labor. The struggle against disease in the tropical dig sites, the bureaucratic effort to sustain the endeavor, these were modern reflections of the age-old price of connection. The ancient pharaoh who dreamed of linking the Nile to the Red Sea would have understood the ambition behind Suez instantly. It was the same dream realized with industrial might. To connect worlds, to control the currents of commerce, that's an ambition as old as civilization itself, and this continuity reveals something about innovation. We often think of technological progress as a series of disruptive leaps where the new replaces the old, but the story of canals shows it's also a slow, cumulative refinement. Each generation learns from the last, improves the design, applies new materials to an ancient problem. The modern canal engineer isn't inventing a new concept. They're speaking a more advanced dialect of the same hydraulic language, the language first written in mud and stone thousands of years ago. Our global infrastructure with superhighways and fiber optic cables, it often feels entirely new. Yet it springs from the same foundational impulse that dug the first irrigation ditch, the impulse to overcome distance, to facilitate exchange, to bend the environment to a shared human purpose. The ancient canals were the first draft of a connected world. Every ship that passes through Panama today is sailing on that original, enduring current. A line of ink on silk, a quiet canal in a Chinese scroll. It's never the loud subject. It's a slender brushstroke of water, guiding the eye from a mountain through a village toward the horizon. That was philosophy. The canal represented the ideal, the harmonious integration of human order into nature. The mountain was wild majesty. The village was human community. And the canal was the dialogue between them, a deliberate intervention. It didn't conquer, it collaborated. It symbolized the Confucian ideal, a well-ordered society. Flowing with the same peaceful purpose as water finding its level, the artist was making a statement. True civilization doesn't scar the land, it converses with it. And the canal was the vocabulary for that conversation. Half a world away on the dry Persian plateau, water took on a different weight. In the verses of poets like Rumi or Hafez, flowing water is a constant metaphor. It is life itself, wisdom, clarity, the divine essence that nourishes the soul's garden. When Hafez writes of a stream in a desert, he isn't just describing scenery. He's invoking a miracle, the life-giving force. It's hard not to see the inspiration of the Qanat, those underground canals bringing water from the mountains. Or the vital irrigation channels of ancient Persia, that engineering marvel, the daily miracle of water in a dry place, seeped into the cultural subconscious. It became the ultimate symbol. The canal, hidden or visible, was physical proof that wisdom and sustained effort could bring life to barrenness. So when the poet spoke of spiritual thirst and the river of grace, his listeners knew what that felt like. They lived it, but symbols shift with time. Fast forward to 18th and 19th century Europe. The Romantic artists looked at ruins with fascination, and sometimes those ruins were canals. A crumbled lock in a forgotten forest, a moss-covered aqueduct arching over a meadow, no longer functioning. In this new eye, the canal wasn't a symbol of harmonious order. It was a symbol of order's opposite, the transience of human ambition, the sublime power of nature to reclaim what was built. A painting of a Roman canal being swallowed by vines and trees wasn't just a scene. It was a meditation. It asked the viewer to consider the fragility of even the greatest empires. The water might still trickle through, but the purpose was gone. The control had evaporated. This romantic ruin transformed the canal from an icon of power into a poignant memento mori, a reminder that all our systems, no matter how grand, are temporary. Arrangements against the patient, relentless growth of time. This journey through art and literature does something. It elevates the canal from a thing we build to a thing we think with. It becomes a cultural icon, a versatile metaphor. In one culture, it's the line of harmony. In another, the stream of wisdom. In another, the ghost of past glory. Each interpretation reveals what that society valued or feared about its own place in the world. The canal, in becoming art, stopped being just about moving goods. It started moving minds. It became a way to talk about the human condition itself, our drive to create order from chaos, our anxiety that chaos will always win in the end, and our enduring obsession with that most elemental force, water. To channel it is to try to channel meaning itself. So when we look at these paintings or read these poems, we're not just seeing a depiction of a waterway. We're seeing the reflection of a civilization's deepest hopes and its quietest fears, mirrored in the water it worked so hard to command. Every great story has pages left unturned. The history of these canals is like that. We have satellites, we have shovels, but some questions just won't settle. They stay in journals, in field reports, debated over coffee. The Canal of the Pharaohs, that link between the Nile and the Red Sea. We know it was attempted. We have Darius's inscription, but the path it took across the Sinai, the true width, the depth, how many ships it could handle in a season. These are puzzles. Was it a busy shortcut for centuries or a symbolic project that silted up right after it was finished? Every new pottery shard, every soil layer adds a piece, but the full picture stays out of focus. Then, across the ocean in Mesoamerica, the Maya and others built intricate canals around cities like Caracol in the Valley of Mexico, masterpieces of hydraulic engineering managing water for agriculture. But were they just for irrigation and drainage, or were they trade routes? Could a canoe with obsidian from the highlands or cacao from the lowlands have traveled those quiet, green corridors? The evidence is subtle. A canal's design might suggest transport, but without the docks, without the specific cargo finds we see elsewhere, it's a theory. It asks us to see those waterways not just as tools for survival, but as silent streets in a rainforest city. And then there's the sky. In arid Central Asia, along the Silk Road, small canal systems fed oasis towns. Vital pit stops for caravans, but their existence was a delicate balance. Long-term climate shifts, slow changes in rainfall over decades. A series of drier years could lower the water table, make the canals useless. A period of intense floods could breach the banks beyond repair. The rise and fall of a trading post might not have been about war or politics, but a gradual change in the weather the engineers couldn't overcome. These networks were in a conversation with a planet that was never still, and the ideas themselves, the pound lock, that chamber that lifts boats over hills. We see a sophisticated version in 10th century China on the Grand Canal. Centuries later, we see similar technology in the canals of the Low Countries in Europe. Was this knowledge slowly diffusing along the trade routes the canals supported? A concept passing from merchant to engineer across continents? Or was it an independent invention? When two minds face the same problem, how to move a boat uphill without wasting water, they might arrive at a similar solution, separated by vast distance and time. This isn't just about who was first, it's about the nature of human ingenuity. Does it leap from mind to mind, or does it spring up wherever the need is great enough? These aren't idle questions, they're the engine of discovery. An archaeologist's trowel scraping against a strangely aligned stone in a dried-up riverbed could be the key. A new map from LIDAR data might reveal a canal branch leading to a forgotten marketplace. A core of ancient pollen from Silt might tell a story of changing crops and therefore changing trade goods. History isn't a closed book on a shelf, it's an ongoing investigation, a conversation with the past where every answer pulled from the mud seems to whisper two more questions. And that might be the most fitting legacy for these waterways. They were built to carry things forward, and they still are, carrying our curiosity into the depths of the story. A map of the ancient world is a map of desire. The lines we see now, the borders, the mountains, they speak of separation, but underneath that there's another map. A map drawn in water, a blueprint of connection, and if you follow those forgotten currents, you find a world already whispering to itself across huge distances. Those ancient canals, they were far more than ditches. They were the original framework for a connected planet. Long before satellites, before fiber optics, they were the silent, physical internet. Carrying grain, carrying silk, carrying the ideas that shaped civilizations, they were the backbones of empires, letting power flow as predictably as water. And they were engines of cultural exchange, a Buddhist sutra sharing a barge with Persian carpets, each one transforming the lands they reached. These waterways, they teach us things. They're masterclasses in ingenuity, societies staring down impossible geography, a mountain, a desert, a continental divide, and saying, we will go through. They show the economic power of connectivity, how lowering the cost to move a sack of grain could birth market towns, monetize economies, fund dynasties. And they offer an early lesson in environmental impact, how grand ambition could reshape a landscape, creating fertile gardens but also risking salinization. Siltation, a profound dependency on constant, vigilant maintenance. Their story is brilliant achievement, shadowed by immense human effort, progress woven from complex threads. But that legacy didn't evaporate. It flows right into our modern world. It's in the monumental locks of the Panama Canal, lifting colossal ships on principles first tested in wood and earth. It's in the global trade routes that still follow the logic of those ancient shortcuts, seeking the most efficient path. It's in our very expectation of an interconnected global system. We stand on the banks they dug, so next time you look at a map, let your eye wander. Don't just see the solid lands, look for the lines between them. The curve of a river, the straight shot of a modern canal. There, in the spaces we labored to fill with water, lies a hidden history, a history of how we first tried to stitch a world together. How we spoke to rivers and moved mountains not with magic but with will, and how we built the foundations of our connected present, one careful, flowing channel at a time.